my friends, welcome back to Meerkat Musings. I'm your host Ben, and coming at you this afternoon with thoughts around school uniforms. And once again, there'll be a blog post to accompany this video. But once again, I'm doing this in a cross-channel kind of way because I want to, and because doing this verbally sometimes yields different thoughts to what I've written down. And it can be interesting to sort of see, how the process is different between, video and writing. But I suspect this is going to be more or less the same. And my thoughts around school uniforms are they truly necessary? Is it not maybe better to let kids wear what they want, within reason, of course, when they go to school? And I'm looking at some of the cultural differences in play here between what we do in the UK and what goes on in mainland Europe and also in North America as well. In the UK, school uniforms are the norm. I think virtually every school, to my knowledge, has some kind of uniform. My memories of infant and junior school were wearing a uniform. It was little more than a cardigan, to be fair, with the school logo on it. But I wore one at infant school and at junior school, and my daughter had a similar experience in school as well. In fact, she had to wear a uniform to go to nursery. In fairness, it was quite a comfortable kind of like pullover thing that she had, but one way or the other, uniforms have been a part and parcel of my school life, certainly from virtually day one, and they've been a part of my daughter's life. And I suspect anyone that's been to school in the UK over a pretty long span of time really has worn a uniform. So why would we wear a uniform? Are there benefits to having school uniforms? And what would be the benefits of saying farewell to school uniforms? I think one of the reasons that school uniforms exist in this country is the idea that they can foster a sense of perhaps community, maybe a bit of pride in one's school. The uniform associates us with the school. We feel a sense of connection to the school, perhaps a sense of connection to one another, and it I don't know, is perhaps a method of bonding in some way, shape or form. It creates a sense of uniformity, which isn't necessarily a good thing in my view, but nonetheless there is perhaps a small sense of community within the walls. So you might argue that's a plus point, of course. It could be argued that it creates a sense of tribalism, which isn't necessarily a good thing. When I went to senior school, there were actually two senior schools right nearby each other, and I'm not saying it happened on a daily basis or even a weekly basis, but there were occasions when there was a bit of tension between the students on these different schools, and of course it was very easy to mark who was from what school because of the uniform. And although the uniforms were broadly similar, each school had its own unique badge, and there were some differences to a small degree between some of the blazers and that kind of thing to distinguish one school from another. And there were occasions where things were a bit frosty for no reason other than because just they could be, and because kids were acting up between some of the different students from different schools. Not especially because these two schools were more or less on top of each other, within they were within easy walking distance of one another. So there was a little bit of of that going on, shall we say. And so there is that, as I say, that tribalism aspect that could be perceived as coming from having a set school uniform. It can happen regardless. To be fair, so you can still have that notion of tribalism, but also that notion of community with or without a uniform. But does a uniform make it more obvious? I don't know. I kind of feel like it does. That's my gut feeling on the subject, and it's one reason why I would say no to school uniforms. Another reason would be, and I mean this in a literal, a literal and figurative sense, school uniforms in the UK, particularly at senior school level, are stifling and stuffy. I mean that in both senses because, number one, they are very monotone. It's usually like a black or blue, navy blue blazer, and then you've got a white shirt and a tie, black or navy blue trousers, black shoes. Everyone does the same thing. Virtually every school, certainly every senior school, does more or less the same thing. It's all a bit lifeless and dull in many regards. And it's also, they can be stuffy physically. It's not always a particularly comfortable thing to have to wear. I, for one, never particularly found donning all of that to be a comfortable experience. It's particularly uncomfortable as it gets warmer. And although my school, for one, operated a policy of a summer uniform, which was a polo shirt in the summertime, you still had the blazer, you still had these black trousers. Black, of course, absorbs the heat. So it was still a stuffy, sweaty, unpleasant experience. And I'm not sold on the idea that's actually better for the purpose of learning, in my view. There's also the idea that it kind of stifles a child's imagination a little bit. Everything that you kind of turn to in senior school can often feel quite, it feels grey, it feels bland. And part of that is because all the students are, they're sort of grey and bland in these uniforms. And you could argue, from a teacher's point of view, perhaps it helps in terms of maintaining a degree of control and discipline. But if we want people to be creative and imaginative, then that starts with childhood, and it starts with a child's ability to express themselves. And one way in which people express themselves is through their clothing. And sometimes this actually is a means of expressing one's culture in some way, shape and form as well. And that's another reason to perhaps say no to uniforms and yes to a more relaxed dress code at school. I would also make the argument that if someone is more comfortable in their own skin, then they could probably end up being more productive. We do see this in a sort of roundabout fashion. It's not really connected to school per se, but what we've seen with working from home, for example, where possible, of course, we've actually seen more productivity from people when they're in a comfortable environment. So, there's definitely a case to be made that you can actually get more out of people when they feel a bit more relaxed, a bit more at ease. And part of that is going to be in terms of how we dress, and it's certainly going to apply, I think, to school kids. If they can wear their comfy jeans and a t-shirt that they feel good in, then you might actually find you get more out of them rather than less. And of course it has to be appropriate. You can't have unsavoury logos and statements on shirts and that kind of thing when you're at school, but there's no reason why you can't just foster a little bit of imagination, and it helps them to be more at ease in their own skin. And I don't think that's a bad thing when it comes to learning. You have to take the rough with the smooth, of course, with this, and there are downsides. And you see this it's a bit of a cliche, really, but you do see this with like sort of TV shows set in American schools, for example, where you have the cool kids table and that kind of thing, because a uniform, in one sense, is also a level playing field, shall we say. What you have is everyone is kind of on the same standing, so to speak, in a social sense. Whereas if people are wearing what they want, you soon have a situation where you have the haves and have-nots. There'll be some students whose parents are in a position to afford them designer clothes, for example, and there'll be others who are perhaps struggling more. And that might, unfortunately, start to show a little bit in the in the schooling situation, and that can lead to an uncomfortable and unpleasant sort of social hierarchy developing within a school. So there is a downside, although that can still happen anyway, even with uniforms. We'll still have some kids who might have, for example, a fancier phone than others. They might have a brand name designer rucksack for their school books that other kids won't have. They might have a better phone, for example, and of course a phone these days is a big status symbol. So you might have all of this going on with uniforms anyway. So it's not necessarily the most compelling reason to say, let's kick, let's keep uniforms. So overall, my feeling on the subject is that there are more negatives to school uniforms than there are positives. I for one, didn't particularly like them. I don't think that most kids particularly like wearing them, to be honest, and they wear them because they have to. And let's not forget, we talk about the social hierarchy and the cost of clothes and things, but there's a cost attached to school uniform as well. School uniforms are sort of mandatory, but they're also something that have to be paid for by the parents. We're saying, you must have a uniform, you must have this, this and this. Oh, by the way, it's going to cost you X, Y and Z. Wow, brilliant, great, thanks. You're forcing this extra expense upon every parent, which is a little bit, if you ask me, unfair. And I just think maybe we should be thinking about that aspect as well. Whether or not it happens, of course, is a different matter, but it does make you stop and think along those lines as well. So those are my thoughts on the idea of school uniforms. As I say, I'll be putting this out there in written form. At some point. There is a post scheduled, not for a while yet. The blog posts and the videos, if you haven't already guessed, are horribly out of sync. But you will eventually get the written version of this. But in the meantime, I invite you to leave your thoughts and your comments. Perhaps you didn't mind the uniform when you were at school. Perhaps you hated it. And I'd just be curious to hear from people as to what their thoughts are on the subject. So, do leave a comment if you've enjoyed this video. Leave a like. If you want more videos, please subscribe. Please check out www.meerkatmusings.co.uk. And hopefully we'll be doing this all again really, really soon. Take care. Bye-bye.